It's the bird emergency. I'm Grant Williams, and I'm always delighted to bring to you one of the practical workers, the academics, or the good old volunteers putting the sweat into saving the endangered birds of the planet. And for those international listeners, I'm sorry, it's Australia again. It's Australia again. Today, we're speaking with Mick Callan, who's a director of Habitech Australia, and we're going to talk about the crisis in the availability of nesting hollows for birds, but also the other critters that require them. And Mick is joining me from Bathurst in regional New South Wales. So we're going to just be a little bit patient with Malcolm Turnbull's internet. Thanks, Malcolm. And we'll take it from there. Mick, thanks for joining me. How are you today?
I'm well, thanks, Grant. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, Mick, we were just discussing before I pressed the go button that I spoke to you. It's probably coming up on 12 months ago, or perhaps even more, about nest boxes and how artificial hollows could perhaps be encouraged to get out there with municipal bodies. And we were talking about corporate sponsorship and things like that way back then. Since then, you've done a good bit of research, a project that hasn't yet been published, but that we can talk about today. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you got interested in the hollows and some of the work that you had previously done with regional or any of the metropolitan municipal councils? And for the overseas listeners, that's our most local form of government. That's the people who are looking after our local parks, mowing our nature strips and collecting our garbage.
Yeah, I guess as a bit of background, I was working from about, I think around 2015 for a group of 19 councils out in the central west of New South Wales. So across a huge area, those 19 local government areas covered in the order of 120,000 square kilometres. And we got funding to do a project where we were sort of at the forefront of the chainsaw hollows, where we got arborists, or tree doctors as people commonly refer to them, to actually cut hollows into standing trees, which over the last sort of 5 or 6 years has become a little bit more commonplace, but at the time was very new and quite radical. And that really was the thing that piqued my interest in hollows and got me learning more about how the situation is for hollow-dependent fauna. And that sort of pushed me towards getting back to uni and doing a research project.
And what was? No, let me start that question again. What did you think you needed to find out to further the work that you could do to be more productive's the wrong word, but to be, well, let's use the buzzword productive in the broader landscape with hollows?
Yeah, it was obvious to me after we did that project that there were a lot of people coming to us and saying, "You guys have done hundreds of these. You sort of at the front of the pack, what have you found?" And at the time, we didn't have any research associated with it. It was very much results driven, based on the funding. Was get the money, do the work, tick the box, which is unfortunate. But from that, we lined up a PhD student out of UTS, Rhiannon Honey, who's now wrapping up her PhD on those chainsaw hollows, and just found some really interesting stuff around thermal properties and species use. So I think in the end we had over 20 species using those chainsaw hollows, nearly all of them native. There are a couple of exotics. But yeah, it really made it clear to me that if you're wanting to do something new and different, you need to actually have a bit of theory and research behind it, the sort of replicable stuff that people can take on board and go, this isn't just anecdotal, it's proof. So that was good for me.
Yep. Mick, I think we're having terrible audio coming through from your end. Do you know where the wireless hub is near you? Like, can you see
no
it?
idea.
Is it no? All right, we'll just persevere. I just hope we can.
Would it be better if I tried on the phone?
Probably not, because that's much harder for me at this end to get it to sound right. Hopefully, the way StreamYard works, it's recording you and recording me, and then pushing it out. So hopefully, when it downloads you, it's just getting you speaking to your computer and me speaking to my microphone. So we'll just press on, and I just have to be listening very hard. Let me get back in the mud. So Mick, what's basically the difference between the, shall we say, the uptake that you've been able to work out between the birds that use the chainsaw hollows and the birds that are using your nesting boxes? And have you trialed lots and lots of designs for the nesting boxes?
Yeah, the nesting boxes has been a slow journey. I started with an idea a few years ago now where I thought if we could make a timber nest box that was insulated in an outer casing, it could help with the thermal properties, but it could also help with the longevity. So initially, I was playing around with timber octagons that I'd put together that inserted into PVC pipe, and then was using 3D printed fittings on those as entrances and push the duct to fit onto the PVC pipe. And all the research that I did really led from that. So we went through a lot of iterations of the nest boxes with 3D printing. We used 3D printed components through to full 3D printed units that we field trialled, a couple of iterations of those. And then what we moved towards was 3D printed nest boxes with double walls that then had timber inserts inside. So effectively they're a triple walled nest box, but they're very lightweight and very durable. So they should, in theory, last a very long time in the field.
Now, the PVC pipe, outer casing, and then the octagon of timber on the inside. Tell me a couple of things about that. What are the species that you targeted with that design? And do you have to be really choosy about the timber? Because a number of people have said to me that we can't use recycled timbers or old timbers because of the treatments that might have been used on the timbers. So tell me about how you had to go about selection, and I'm really interested in what size that design was and what species have been using it.
Yeah, that was pretty easy for me because I'd pulled an old compost bin and a fence at home, and they were all old hardwood planks that were untreated. So that was really simple reuse of old hardwood timber that otherwise probably would have been burnt or gone to landfill. Initially, I was using 150mm diameter PVC pipe, which resulted in about a 110mm internal diameter, which is really quite small. So probably suited to pardalotes and pygmy possums and things like that. But we also did a bit of playing around with 300 mil pipe, which allowed us to put out much larger diameter. So it was about 250 mil internal. We got to do some thermal trials on those over sort of the winter period. And then we lost all of those hollows in the large bushfires the other sort of 12, 18 months ago before we got to do any real monitoring work. So unfortunately, species use on that was very limited. We've got some anecdotal stuff of species checking them out, but outside of the breeding season. So the exciting thing was we saw feather-tailed gliders and brown tree creepers and all sorts of things checking them out. We don't have any confirmed breeding data from those boxes.
So it's something that we're finding a lot, that a lot of research has been lost as a result of the fires, and then hasn't been able to be continued during the COVID lockdown. So having lost your PVC pipe and timber insert test boxes, how did you come up with the idea to use 3D printing? Because I know that was sort of the next step. Now, that to me seems like it would be really, really expensive. So tell me what led you down that path, and what do you think the future use and take up on a wide scale with municipal bodies and other conservation bodies could possibly be with those boxes?
Yeah, this is, I was really fortunate I was doing the graduate certificate of ornithology at CSU at the time. And I was talking to Dave Watson, the professor down there, and said, look, I've got this idea. I'm wanting to do some research and hoping that you might be able to take me on. And he got pretty excited about it. But from the very start, he said to me, there's a lot of people doing things with nest boxes and trying to make them better and improve the thermal properties. But everyone seems to be kind of playing around at the edges with the idea that we start with the timber nest box and work to improve that. His approach was go back to the drawing board. Tell me what we need for threatened species to use these things, and then let's develop that with the best way we can do it. And 3D printing came as a pretty obvious choice because we could use lightweight materials and we could really shape any sorts of shapes we wanted. So we were able to create round shapes. We were able to create sort of ladders, if you like, all built into the printing process, into the design, using 3D printing. So in my previous work that I'd been doing with local government, I had some good connection with some engineers, and including one who had moved over from local government to CSU to work in their engineering school, and I knew they had some 3D printers available in the lab there. It was a little bit complex to get some work happening across departments in a university, but we got there, and that's really where it all led from, and we were able to put out some pretty interesting prototypes early days. And then I ended up investing in my own 3D printers just to keep things moving along a bit and get put out some bigger sizes. But I would say initially I went in with the idea that 3D printing could be a really great way of getting heaps of people making nest boxes at home to be used in the field. And then the more I delved into that area, I realised that the process is so slow and tedious to make anything of a sufficient size, and also really expensive. Plastics that are available for home 3D printers really aren't suitable for putting out in the field for any long-term periods. It was really great prototyping while going about things, but in terms of production, just not practical at all, unfortunately.
Now you were saying home 3D printing. Do you think that having discounted that idea that everyone can go out and spend $500 on a printer and then get the materials and print their own nest box. You've dispensed that idea, but what about industrial scale printing that maybe each city might have one or two of those kind of printers, or maybe, I mean, what's the one that you invested in? Is that something that you would be continuing to make your own nest boxes to put out in the field, or would you be looking at a heftier, gruntier model?
Yeah, we still have about, I think at the last count we had 7 3D printers of various sizes, but we're really using them mainly for prototyping and making sure that our ideas on the computer as we see them. I'm an ecologist. I'm very tactile and hands-on. I work with a really great engineer here, and he's great at design and can tell me everything works. But for me, having something on the screen doesn't translate having it in your hand and getting it to go. That's not quite as I envisaged or what I wanted. And in terms of cost, we had one nest box, a full-scale nest box, in it was nylon, a really hard plastic, and it cost us over $5,000. So
one box,
one nest box, yeah.
Oh, well,
so this is why we've invested in getting Habitech set up, and we're moving towards injection molding for commercial production.
Okay, well that was kind of my next question. I wasn't going to really limit it to injection molding, but whether you had looked at other industrial processes that could give you an acceptable design. And I mean, we need to have a number of different sizes available to be able to get to cover any sort of landscape in any meaningful form. So have you done any rough figures on what a comparable injection molding outer case would cost, and then the cost of the timber?
Yeah, we're actually going through the process at the moment. So we've invested a lot of money. We've got all our tooling happening at the moment for that injection molding process, and we're looking to hit the market early new financial year with boxes retailing with the timber inserts. So a 250mm internal, 400mm high nest box will be around the $200 mark. And completely modular, so we can make multiple units. It can be 200 high or 4, 6, 8. We've got different sized entrances, and we can restrict the entrances with the timber, so they'll be able to be configured to a whole range of different species.
The thing that people always tell me, Mick, when I talk about nest boxes, because anyone who's ever followed the show and chatted to me on Twitter or whatever knows that it's something I've always had a bee in my bonnet about. Years ago, I worked for Bunnings, and I used to despair at the amount of timber that after every shift was put into skips and was then out and then got put into a truck and went to landfill. And that happened every shift. And I was in one store, and Bunnings has got God knows how many stores. So I've always been thinking there has got to be a way to stop this material going to landfill. I also, around the same time, I worked in irrigation, and I worked for a company that supplied pipe to building sites, basically to the companies who put irrigation into new estates. So again, seeing the offcuts of pipe being either putting in the skip to go to landfill, or the usual thing that the builders were doing would put it in a pile or in a 44-gallon drum and burn them. And I was thinking, God, so there's only a couple of pipe manufacturers and distributors in the country. There's 3 main ones. So surely there's a program where they're delivering stuff to these sites every day. Surely we can work out a way to pick up the offcuts and, if not recycle them, send them to somebody like you, or I've always thought the men's sheds should be able to use them with a design, the standard design, and get them out in the landscape. But I don't know. That's almost going to be my life's crusade, Mick, if I can get it going. The funny thing is, the companies are really interested in doing something good if they can, but the disconnect seems to be that nobody seems to agree what a good nest box is, and that seems to be where I get into trouble. Whenever I speak to someone, they go, "Well, you've got to monitor them." So, okay, you've got to monitor them. You've either got to work it into the work program of a local council, or you then have to put the gadgetry in to do the remote monitoring, which adds God knows how much to the price. Which I understand, but it just seems like, well, before we follow that thread, the start of the paper that you sent me goes into how quickly hollows are being reduced in the landscape. Now, that's staggering. Tell us about that, and then tell us about why, even though we're having lots of revegetation projects out there, tell us why we're not replacing hollows. And even as the trees age, the way we're revegetating means we can't possibly get the amount of hollows, even in 40, 50, 60 years, that we are losing. Explain to us why that is.
Yeah, look, it's a global problem, but sadly in Australia, and particularly where I am in New South Wales, we're actually top 10 in the world in terms of land clearing at the moment. And it's generally, the majority of it's being done legally under current legislation. So that's quite scary in itself. But the biggest issue with land clearing in relation to tree hollows is it's typically the old large trees in the landscape that are preferentially cleared, and they're the ones that contain the tree hollows. There's a bit of debate, a bit of movement in the literature around how long it takes to form a tree hollow, but I think it's well established that at the absolute earliest, from a tree either as a seedling growing naturally in the field or being planted, you're looking at a bare minimum of 80 years, more like 100, and probably getting closer to 150 for anything of any reasonable size. Then you start looking towards some of our big owls and cockatoos and brush-tailed possums and the gliders, those sorts of species. You're out to hundreds of years before a tree has a hollow of that sort of size. And then the other issue is with increasing wildfires. Wildfire or bushfires in Australia, they have a double effect. Trees that actually have hollows are more likely to burn, and we lose that resource. But they also have the positive benefit that they can create hollows in trees that don't have existing hollows. So catch-22 there. But the biggest issue with what we do now is when we're clearing land, and if we're having offsets put in, those offsets are generally trees being planted now. So we're hundreds of years away from replacing hollows. And then the way that we revegetate is often really close plantings, lots of stems per hectare. And so you get trees growing up nice and straight and tall, and it takes a lot longer for those trees to form hollows because it's the big old paddock trees with the branches that go sideways and lean out, where the branches are more likely to snap off and create the hollows. So trees that are growing up big and tall, they're losing all those lower limbs earlier on in their life, and they're not retaining them to big limbs. So it takes even longer again in those sorts of plantings for hollows to form.
Yeah, that was the thing that really stood out to me in the paper you sent me, that the density of the revegetation is in fact perpetuating the problem. So we've got the time lag that it takes, as you say. Let's say best case 80 years or 100 years, but then if you've got the density stems per hectare that consistently in all the revegetation works that are being done, it's just too close, that it's going to actually mean that most of those revegetation projects have to senesce before we're going to get any hollows, which could push it, way past and reduce the number of trees that are likely to form hollows anyway. So the poor old critters and the birds can't win the way we're currently doing it. So we either stop clearing or we change the way that we revegetate. But if revegetation is being undertaken with an agroforestry mindset, nobody is going to reduce the density of the stems, of the eucalypt stems that they're putting in. So nest boxes are the only way.
Yeah, at the moment that's the case, and there's plenty of evidence to suggest that they're not appropriate for particularly threatened birds. Mammals have great uptake of nest boxes, and I have a theory about that. Most of the mammals will actually create a bit of a den or a nest, and they have their own fur. They're not as subjected to the thermal fluctuations as birds are because of that, because they'll often line a box and create their own insulation in there. So common species do really well in nest boxes, and in Australia, for my mind, I think common species are becoming less common and need all the help they can get in terms of the hollow users. But things like the superb parrot and the polypellis species, there's a lot of our threatened bird species that there's really no evidence of them using nest boxes, and I think a big part of that probably relates to thermal properties and also the design of getting those shapes right. Microbats are very similar. The amount of information we know of what sort of hollows they use is so limited that by putting up a nest box, you're really only guessing as to what their needs are in many cases.
Well, let's look for a ray of hope, Mick. How cooperative is the research and the sharing of knowledge between all the different interested bodies and the academics and the practical conservationists who are working with hollows? How cooperative? How much information sharing is going on?
I can only speak from my experience, but for me, people have been extraordinarily generous with their information and knowledge and research. So I've found that to be a really positive thing. I think it's the way forward. Everyone in this industry is wanting good outcomes, and so no one's really protecting their research too much. They give up a bit of information respectfully on the understanding that it's not distributed beyond what they're doing. But it's been really collegiate. I've been pleasantly surprised by that.
Where do you think you have to go next with your research to make boxes cost effective? And when Habitech is a bit further down the track, who are you going to be looking to provide boxes to? And let's draw it out even further. are you going to try and keep refining them to target the species who are in decline, whose populations are in decline, rather than let's call them boxes, not nest boxes, that might be used by common mammals?
Yeah, so a few points in there. Touch on, I think initially, one of the big issues with timber nest boxes is they have and people will argue this, generally it's sort of understood that a good timber nest box will last about 10 years. And there's plenty of evidence where people have constructed beautiful nest boxes that are maintained and will last 20 or 30 years, but they're certainly the exception. When we started down this path, one of the big things that was obvious was that a lot of nest boxes are put up as offsets for land clearing, whether that's road construction or mining or agriculture or urban expansion. And those nest boxes are generally put up as a tick the box, walk away. No one's ever going back to maintain or monitor those. And within 10 years, you've got nest boxes falling out of the trees, and you're still at least 90 years away from any re-veg plantings developing hollows. So you may have at best artificially kept populations sustained for a decade, but then you crash to really back to the 0 point of no hollows in the area.
Now, I wasn't aware that. Sorry, Mick. I wasn't aware that putting up any old nest box was able to be included in offsets. That's staggering to me. That just seems like a really, really easy out that either a local government or a state government has taken. Who, in your experience, who's responsible for that? If there isn't enough research out there that says this is actually an effective way of maintaining a population, who's allowed that to be a standard way of gaining offsets?
Yeah, look, it's often a condition of consent that hollows that are cleared are replaced, nest boxes replace them, and it's often at an increased number of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 to 1 hollow.
But if they don't work, that's pointless. That's like saying, sorry, I wrecked your car, mate. Here's 5 bicycles in exchange. That's dumb.
Yeah, so that was part of what we were looking at when we were really aiming to make a long-lasting nest box. So for those big organisations that put up a box and walk away. So if we can keep some habitat in the landscape for decades rather than 10 years, that's hopefully a win, and getting the thermal properties right was the other key thing for us. And one of the other things with timber nest boxes is, and in terms of who we're targeting, it is those big ones that are walk away, because we know that people that love birds and want to put up nest boxes around their property, they're more likely to maintain them and replace them when they fail and keep that resource turning over. So they're not so much the market for us as the big mobs that are happy to put up boxes and walk away, and hopefully we've got a solution for them that can last a lot longer and be a lot more effective.
So we talked about local councils, but without identifying anyone, Mick, you don't have to do that, but who are the organisations, the big ones, as you said, who would be taking up your nest boxes when the development and it is done and they're out there and you're producing them in bulk? Is it the sort of companies who are doing mining, re-veg and land repair? Is it Greening Australia? Is it Landcare Australia? Who do you see as being the main clients for Habitech?
At the moment, we've been having conversations, very positive conversations, with a whole range of people from some large mines, and energy companies, some local government agencies, and some state government organisations as well. So quite a broad range across, at this stage, across a large part of Eastern Australia.
So let's again, looking for a ray of light, Mick. How far off having something available for those potential clients that you think will be serviceable for, say, 20, 30 years in the landscape, that are going to actually be used by the species that we're in danger of losing? How far off do you think we are in being able to produce those varied size nest boxes?
Yeah, we'll be, from all the advice we've received from our manufacturer, we'll be putting units out retail in the first quarter of 21-22 financial year. So not far away, hopefully a few short months.
Okay, well, let's see how good you know your potential price list. If we're looking at hollows for, well, we've just put out today the episode on glossy black cockatoos on Kangaroo Island. So for a bird the size of a glossy, what kind of price? What? Let's use a better word. What's the investment that a landowner or a authority would need to make in a one nesting location for a bird the size of a black cockatoo?
That's a great question. We're not quite. We won't be manufacturing anything suitable for glossies at this stage. Our first production units will be 250 mil internal, which is the square glossies. They're probably looking at more like 350 thereabouts, I'd expect. So
you're looking more at the superb parrot kind of size, is that right?
Yeah, correct.
A medium parrot.
Yeah, so the medium to larger parrots that, and there's a reason we've done that, is because it's been shown that the bigger your nest box is, when you're talking timber nest boxes, the less their lifespan, because the weight on the joints increases too much. So
yep.
Once we get in, that's why we've gone into those sort of bigger sizes. But of course, we can restrict the internals as well. So at this stage, there's a whole host of species that we believe we can target, and we'll be looking at a standard unit, which will be 250 internal by 400 height, will be retailing for $200.
Okay, and that you're looking at a life of what, 30, 40 years for one of those?
We'd certainly hope so. We've worked for a long time with the manufacturer and plastics guys to get the right material. So we're looking at super hard glass fibre reinforced plastics, and they're more expensive. They're UV stable, but the thing is, we sat in an office with these guys and had a mental ruler, and because we were really worried about birds chewing these plastics, and we sat there and just whacked this plastic for about a minute, just bang, 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 and we couldn't even keep a bit of plastic off it. So we're really surprised by that, but that's what we're using for all our entrances and any potential chew points.
Well, that sounds like a very cost-effective, if you're annualising the price, very cost-effective way to preserve endangered species, and even just stopping the decline of common species in the landscape. If we, here's a problem that I see, is that we don't actually value any species in the landscape. I reckon if we were in some way, in a budget of an authority, state, federal, local government, that you could value a pair of superb parrots at $1,000 a year, well, they'd be going, oh well, we better put up a lot of nest boxes, and you say if you lose a pair, we're going to debit your state grant by $8,000. I don't know. Just thinking laterally, well, then all of a sudden people would be doing things. That Mick, I did ask a little bit about the idea of monitoring. How many people have said to you, but we need to be able to monitor these things, otherwise you're just going to be filled up with Indian miners. Is that something that you're coming across?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a very reasonable and fair point, particularly with our boxes that are quite new. People want to see results. They want to know what's using them, and it depends what sort of monitoring you want. I think when you talk nest box monitoring, for the sort of work I've done with the research, I ended up with over 1 million photographs to process of things coming in and out of boxes and pre-hollows. And that takes an incredible amount of time just to go through, even though you just click. Anyone that's worked with remote sensing cameras and processing that volume of data would well understand it's pretty burdensome. But I think for most people, going and checking nest boxes probably annually is enough, depending on whether you're targeting birds or mammals. Just making sure that they're in good nick, that they don't need repair or replacement, and to check them for exotic species. I think that's a really important factor, that once you've got exotics in an area and they're breeding up, so I see it a lot around here, particularly in the peri-urban areas with starlings and Indian miners, that once they get a hold, they're so competitive with those hollows that their numbers increase exponentially, and they really drive out the rest of the hollow users.
Sounds like Daniela's method with the audio moth might be able to be used on a much broader scale than she's been doing so far, because monitoring is probably 4 or 5 times more expensive than the nest box.
Yeah, it absolutely can be. And the other thing is the installation can often be as expensive, more expensive than the nest box itself. So it's been a big problem with nest boxes over a long period, that more broadly with a lot of environmental stuff. So tree planting is the same. You can easily get a grant to go and put trees in the ground or to put nest boxes in a tree, but no one wants to fund the follow-up maintenance and monitoring of those. So once the boxes are ticked and walk away, the funding body's happy, and who knows what's happened in 2 or 3 years, whether you've actually had a good positive environmental outcome or not, if that monitoring and maintenance isn't in place. So I think that's really looking part of where money is in the environment at the moment. But having said that, the money that is available is so limited, it's not surprising that the funding bodies want those green ticks and be able to move on, rather than sort of the things that might be a little less exciting for their audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, this is where corporate Australia we need to find willing partners, and for them to commit beyond a 1-year program or a 2-year program. I think that's the challenge ahead for all of us. Mick, what's your very next step that you've got in the next 6 to 12 months that you've got to undertake?
Well, we'll be retailing, as I said, from sort of July, August, all going well. But we've also got some other trials underway that are happening where we're just continuing to work with our brackets, and we're getting some hugely positive data coming back on their bracket design, which is pretty unique. We've developed a bracket that our boxes sit on that the tree actually grows over the bracket so that it can't fail once that's happened. So yeah, essentially the nest box is where the bracket is consumed by the tree so that there's no failure point there, and it's normally the critical point where the boxes will fail. So we've got some work to come out of that, but it's looking very positive. And we've got some other work we're doing around substrates and the actual bedding material that's put into nest boxes, and we've got some really interesting data on that as well that's showing that it's absolutely critical that what you've got in the base of a nest box can contribute to the microclimate, at least as importantly as what your insulating materials are.
Can we draw that out a little bit, Mick? Because the conventional thing that I've always thought, I mean, and looking up everything about building your own nest box and putting them up in a tree, and you want your rosellas to come in or whatever, there's always just been a couple of handfuls of sawdust in the bottom. Tell us what people should be using.
Well, it's complicated in that in a timber nest box, you don't necessarily want high humidity because it will greatly reduce the lifespan of your box. So that becomes problematic. But with all the monitoring we've done with natural hollows, they maintain a very high and constant level of humidity, and that's really needed for particularly birds with eggs. They need that high humidity for the eggs to hatch successfully, or preferred at least. So it's just another benefit that we came across with using plastic in the construction of our boxes, because we can put some substrates in there that really hold that humidity level at quite a high point. And then we've found subsequently that it also helps regulate the temperature. So our boxes without any bedding material in them fluctuated much more widely than boxes that had bedding material inside. So pretty important finding.
So what bedding material were you using, Mick?
For a lot of our trials, I sourced for my honours thesis. I sourced some what I would call mud guts, so the decomposed timber, heartwood timber mud guts from inside tree hollows. So I know a local arborist here who had to remove dangerous trees, and he was able to supply me with a few big tubs of that, and so we used that during laboratory trials. And it was really surprising, the results that came back really interesting. And that's what we've been doing over the last sort of 12 or 18 months, is trying to replicate what substrates we can put in that aren't taking that natural material from the environment because it's not readily available, but how we can replicate that sort of decomposed timber, hardwood timber, and get that something that's more readily available to just pop into nest boxes and get them installed.
Yeah, that would be very, very hard to get on a production level quantity, wouldn't it? So, would one of the commercial compost products perhaps work in a similar way?
Yeah, we're looking at a bit of a blend at the moment, which is showing some really good results with a bit of combination that we're using with a mixture of some coarse material and some fines and then some medium material. And it's, at least visually, will appear to be a really good sort of substrate for the birds, particularly, or mammals, to get in there and lay a nest on, make those things.
Okay, so what are you undertaking any formal research now, or is it all sort of in-house company research, or is there actually an academic program that's continuing on?
A little of both. We're doing a lot of trials sort of in-house at the moment, but we're also, Carl, who is business partner, the other director in Habitech, he's a pretty prolific publisher, and we're wanting to get some of these results published on the track once we sort of get more formalised with the way we're going together.
Who are the journals or the publications who are going to publish nestbox studies?
Good question. I'll be leaning on Dave Watson a little bit for advice there. So I've got one paper that you've had a look at that I'm still refining and hoping to get out for publication quite soon. And then there's a few others in the wings. So yeah, watch this space. I'm on Twitter and Facebook, and I'll be banging the drum pretty loudly once, if we get them accepted.
Okay, well, we've talked an awful lot about your work, but let's just talk a little bit about your experience, Mick. How'd you get to be such a bird nerd?
It all started with an aviary back in Murchison in central Victoria when I was about 10 years old, and my sister and I started breeding budgies. We were very fortunate to grow up on the Goulburn River down there in Victoria, and around some beautiful bird life. And yeah, it was really the catalyst for me to get interested in birds was breeding budgies in the backyard and understanding the genetic combinations and all of that sort of thing, and understanding what birds like and don't like. And yeah, really my interest in birds stemmed from there.
And did you graduate from budgies to Burke parrots, or was budgies it, and then you moved past aviculture?
Yeah, I did. I actually moved from budgies to Burke parrots. I don't know if you knew that or not, but
I didn't know that, but I kept Burkes as a kid. So yeah.
Yeah, I loved the Burkes, and I loved the fact that I could keep them with finches. And the Burkes was about they were as big as I was willing to go, keeping birds in captivity. So yeah, I really enjoyed those. But yeah, I've not kept birds for a lot of years. I've been much more involved in actively setting them out in the field rather than keeping them in captivity for quite a long time now.
Yeah, I think there's a point where you go. Certainly for me, where I went out to my aviary and I looked and I thought, huh. And I look up at the sky and I think, hang on, why have I got these in here? So yeah, I just decided that bird keeping was not, unless it was a particularly conservation focused endeavor. I didn't see how it sort of meshed with my my love of going out with my binoculars and watching birds in the trees. I thought, yeah. Did you have a sort of hallelujah moment like that?
Not particularly, but yeah, I think there's some valuable lessons that come from aviculture, and particularly with the sort of work I'm interested in. I think that we can learn a lot from the guys and girls that have been breeding birds in captivity for a long time. It doesn't always translate to the field, but there's certainly, you see some birds kept in appalling conditions, which really turns me off the idea of it, to be honest.
Yeah, and certainly I don't want to get the hate mail. I'm not against aviculture. I just I think it's a perfectly acceptable hobby, but I certainly think there's some birds that we should not be keeping, and but that's a whole different issue. Favorite bird, Mick?
Oh, I get asked this a lot, and I never have a good answer. I do have a soft spot for the budgies, being the bird that got me into birds in the first place. And there's not many better sights than being out in the desert and seeing huge flocks of budgies. So they're certainly up there, but if you ask me tomorrow, it could change.
It'll be different, yeah. Well, I was going to ask you if you'd been out and seen a large wild flock of budgies, something that's eluded me. So, yeah, I think you're lucky if you have.
Yeah, definitely. I've been fortunate to spend quite a bit of time in the desert. I love it.
So what's your current favourite place to go birding?
Locally at the moment, I love getting up to Walu, or more commonly known as Mount Panorama, and there's a few sites up there. One particular called Albans Reserve, which I actually wrote a management plan for quite a few years ago now. So I'm really familiar with the site. It's just a nice, easy place to go birding for me. There's some stunning birds up there, and I know the place really well. So if ever it's a quiet day, I know where I can just kind of pop up and see something nice like the diamond firetails or other things that pop up around the place breeding now and then, and know a few nests up there. So I just love that. It's like a place that's really comfortable and just nice and refreshing and fulfilling to get out there.
What's the highlight that you've seen up there, Mick? What's your best ever get?
Probably the one that I enjoyed the most was a really large family group of about 15 gangs coming through that still haven't located where they bred, but I'd be shocked if they weren't breeding up on that mountain there somewhere. There were some pretty young birds amongst them.
Very nice, very nice. What's on your bucket list for a place to go birding?
Oh, I should have known that question was coming. I'd love to get back out to the desert. I was very much an amateur birder, and I was spending a fair bit of time in the desert sort of 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So, yeah, I'd love to get back out there with much better skill set and toolbox now to really enjoy it a bit more for the birds.
Well, if you were to head out to the desert next week, what's the favourite bit of kit you'd take with you?
I am a terrible photographer. I tried to get into it, and I just haven't had the time or the energy to really make it work for me. So I'm very much reliant on my binoculars.
And have you got are you a narrow field binoculars? Are you wide field, short and stubby, the big chunkies? What's your preference?
I've got the 8x42s. Yep. They seem a pretty good fit for me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, is there a bird that is your bucket list bird, one that you really wish you could see sometime in your life?
I think for me it would be the macaws. I'd love to see macaws in the wild. I think that would be just about do it for me.
Fantastic. Now you're heading off on your bucket list trip. You're going out to the desert, and you're packing your backpack. And I'm telling you can only take one field guide. What are you taking?
I'm a fan of the Australian Bird Guide. I think it's certainly the best one the most user friendly for my mind. I really like it. I've got a soft spot for a few older ones, but in terms of packing a book in the bag, that's it. But I also, when I'm in the field, if I'm ever a bit curious, it tends to be pulling out the phone for the Pisian Night app, which I find really useful as well.
Yeah, it's a beauty, and having the calls available is pretty good. So
absolutely,
yeah. Last one really for you, Mick. Do you maintain a list? Are you a twitcher?
No, I definitely wouldn't call myself a twitcher, and I get asked that a lot. People go, "Well, isn't that just a birder?" And I don't think I'm alone in this, in drawing the distinction between a twitcher and a birder. But I have chased some pretty rare birds in the past, and for me, I just find it a little bit disheartening to go and find them and then to look at them and think, gee, you know, this is probably the last time I'll get to see them there. You know, I've seen regent honey eaters and it just made me feel a bit kind of sad, really, to be honest, that they're in such a perilous state that, you know, my kids probably aren't going to be able to get to grow up and see those birds unless something changes dramatically. So going off to find the vagrants that probably aren't going to make it back to the other side of the world or that type of thing, it's not really my bag. I'm more interested in getting out and learning as much as I can about the birds in my local patch and enjoying them.
Yeah, I don't get sad when I go and see birds that, like you say, like the regents, and I mean, there's just too many of them to think that your kids might not see them. Certainly, grandkids might not ever get the opportunity to see them. But I worry about the pressure that someone puts out an alert that something has turned up somewhere, and then 150 people turn up and put all that stress on the poor thing. That's yeah. I'm up your end of the spectrum, Mick. There's no doubt about it. I understand the motivation to go and see things, but I just wind back that enthusiasm, because I think, well, if something, especially migrants, the last thing they want while they're trying to eat and refuel to make the return journey is a million people to step off a tour bus and start chasing them around a couple of hectares. Yeah, so, but don't get me started. Don't get me started.
Yeah, I could easily be a twitcher. I don't mind collecting things, but in terms of birds, I've been putting my focus on collecting bird books rather than collecting ticks in the boxes.
Yeah. Old bird magazines are fun. So yeah. Mick, what's next for you outside of developing nest boxes? What other projects are you working on?
I still do a lot of work with the group called the Environment and Waterways Alliance across Central West New South Wales. And we've got currently just started a really big chainsaw hollow project. So we've got 400 chainsaw hollows going in across our region over the next couple of months. And a lot of work's gone into tailoring those for threatened species, birds and bats primarily. Also, some of I think we're going for squirrel gliders as well. Yeah, and we had an honours student lined up to do some research on that project, and it fell through. So if anyone out there is listening that wants to be kind of at the cutting edge of that, we've got good funding for it. We're looking to really get our results pushed out as far and wide as possible once that project's wrapped up and we get our findings from it, because something we learnt from the last project was that a lot of what we did there weren't really good comparable data sets, so we're going much more specific with our hollow dimensions and target species this time, and we're going to get some really good results that we can pass on to other land managers.
Well, Mick, if you give me the info for where interested people should contact about that, I will put it in the show notes and push it out with the Twitter when the episode goes out. So hopefully someone does come forward and take that up. And I certainly want to do a follow-up episode about the chainsaw hollows, because if you can come up with some really good templates, for want of a better word, that land management groups, farm groups can use, well, that gives a whole new dimension for what can be put out there in the landscape as it exists now. So I'll chase you up about that. Don't know whether we'll talk to you or someone else, but that would be terrific. So, Mick, it's been great to meet you. I've been interested in this for a long time, as you know. I'm glad we got this together, and hopefully our crappy NBN has done the job, and that people can enjoy hearing about your work and your your non-bird twitchiness, and how good. Look, I've tongue-tied all of that. I'll get rid of all of that, Mick. This, I'm glad you were able to speak to me from the Central West, given the limitations of our second-rate NBN that we've got at the moment. And I wish you well in the endeavours with Habitech. I'll be looking for one of the nest boxes and donating it to the council to put in my local park, which is straight out the front of my front door. I'd be really interested to see if something other than rainbow lorikeets can get inside it. That would be great. So thanks, Mick. Good luck with everything up there in Bathurst and the Central West, and keep us abreast of what's going on with all the developments, and I'll pass them on to the audience.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Mate, it's always a pleasure to talk to someone who's actually doing the work. I'm just sitting here in my bum talking to you, and it's really great getting the information out there. So that's been the Bird Emergency. Thanks to the people who were also looking as we were going live. Mick, we got a really interesting comment. Hi, the Earth is hollow. So, there's no accounting for the Twitch audience, Mick.
The Earth is hollow.
That's right. The Bird Emergency. I'm Grant Williams. Thanks for listening.